Have you ever looked at the two numbers your doctor writes down at every visit and wondered why they seem to climb a little higher with each passing year? Not your weight, not your cholesterol, the two numbers that describe your blood pressure. They behave differently at 65 than they did at 35. And the food that once seemed good enough may not be good enough anymore. Today I want to walk you through why blood pressure changes with age, what's happening inside your blood vessels, and the 8 vegetables the research keeps pointing to, and why each one works. Not because I said so, but because you'll understand the mechanism. And when you know the reason behind the rule, you never forget the rule. Now I want to be honest with you right from the start. This is not going to be one of those videos where someone rattles off a list of miracle foods and calls it science. I find that kind of content genuinely frustrating because the actual physiology of blood pressure is far more interesting than any magic list. So before we reach a single vegetable, we need to understand the problem we're trying to solve. And one quick thing before we go further. I am not a doctor, and this is general educational information, not medical advice. If you're on blood pressure medication, don't stop it or change the dose based on a YouTube video. Vegetables complement a medical plan, they don't replace one. With that said, let's build the understanding from the ground up. The first thing to understand is that blood pressure is not one number, it's two. Systolic, the top number is the peak pressure when your heart contracts. Diastolic, the bottom number, is the pressure between beats while the heart refills. And here is where aging changes everything. Your large arteries aren't rigid pipes. They're elastic tubes, and that elasticity does critical work. Each time the heart pumps, the aorta stretches and absorbs some of the force of the heartbeat, then springs back between beats, keeping blood moving forward. It's a shock absorber. But over decades, it wears down. The elastin fibers in the arterial wall fray, stiff collagen accumulates, and the result is a slow progressive stiffening of the large arteries, one of the most consistent features of aging. That produces a very specific pattern. Because the arteries can no longer stretch and absorb the pulse the way they used to, the peak pressure climbs higher, systolic rises. Meanwhile, diastolic often stays flat or even drifts downward. High top number, normal or low bottom number. This combination is so common in people over 60 that it has its own name, isolated systolic hypertension. It's estimated that roughly 15% of people 60 and older have it. There's a second change, less famous but just as important, salt sensitivity. As people age, blood pressure becomes more sensitive to dietary salt. The kidneys become less efficient at excreting sodium, and hormonal systems shift in ways that retain it. The practical result? The same amount of salt that barely moved the needle at 40 can push the numbers meaningfully at 70. This is why hypertension becomes dramatically more common with every passing decade, and why a strategy that worked at 40 may need to change. So now we know the problem: stiffer arteries, climbing systolic pressure, growing salt sensitivity. And here's the beautiful part. The foods we're about to discuss address those exact mechanisms. They work by putting specific minerals and plant compounds into a system that desperately needs them. Let me start with the mineral story. It's the foundation for everything else. Your blood vessels are wrapped in smooth muscle that controls how wide each vessel opens, and that width is the single biggest determinant of blood pressure. If the muscle relaxes and the vessel widens, pressure falls. If it contracts, pressure rises. Two minerals in particular govern that relaxation: potassium and magnesium. Potassium is the counterweight to sodium. When potassium is plentiful, the kidneys are better able to flush sodium out, and the smooth muscle of the vessel walls is nudged toward relaxation. The World Health Organization recommends adults get at least roughly 3,500 milligrams of potassium per day. And a comprehensive meta-analysis published in 2013 found that increased potassium intake reduces blood pressure in people with hypertension, with no adverse effects when kidney function is normal. Yet most people land below that target because modern diets are built around processed food, heavy in sodium and light in potassium. That's not a character flaw, it's an environment problem. And the fix is dietary, because potassium arrives overwhelmingly in vegetables and fruit. Magnesium plays a supporting role that's just as physical. It participates in smooth muscle relaxation, helps with nitric oxide production, and regulates vascular tone. Pooled analyses of magnesium supplementation trials have found reductions in systolic blood pressure of roughly 2 millimeters of mercury, modest but meaningful at the population level, and it's waiting in the foods we're about to name. And then there's the big picture evidence. In the late 1990s, a landmark trial called DASH, Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension, took people with elevated blood pressure and fed them a diet rich in vegetables, fruit, and whole grains, low in saturated fat. The results, published in the New England Journal of Medicine by Appel and colleagues, were striking. The combination diet lowered systolic blood pressure by 5.5 millimeters of mercury, more than the control diet, and diastolic by 3 points more. Among people who already had hypertension, the reductions were larger still, rivaling what many single medications achieve entirely from food. Vegetables weren't a garnish in that study. Vegetables were the intervention, so the targets are clear. Relax the vessel wall, support the kidneys, feed the lining of the arteries, counter stiffness. The 8 vegetables I'm about to walk through each hit one or more of those targets with a distinct mechanism. Let's go one by one. Vegetable number 1 is beetroot, and it earns its place through a mechanism that's almost elegant. Beetroot is one of the most concentrated dietary sources of nitrate on the planet, typically carrying 250 to 400 milligrams per 100 grams. And here's what happens to that nitrate after you eat it. It travels to your mouth, where bacteria on your tongue convert it into nitrite. You swallow it. In the acidic environment of your stomach, a portion of that nitrite becomes nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is one of the most important signaling molecules in your entire cardiovascular system. It's the chemical message that tells the smooth muscle in your vessel walls to relax. Vessels widen, blood flows more easily, pressure comes down. This isn't fringe biology. A systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized trials found that inorganic nitrate in beetroot juice significantly reduced systolic blood pressure, and later pooled analyses put the average reduction at roughly 4 to 5 millimeters of mercury systolic and 1.5 to 2 diastolic. A randomized and placebo-controlled study in patients with hypertension, led by researcher Kappel in the journal Hypertension, found that daily dietary nitrate lowered home blood pressure across 4 full weeks, and a 2024 review of clinical trials found beetroot juice lowered systolic blood pressure with effects lasting up to 90 days at daily nitrate intakes of 200 to 800 milligrams. 2 practical notes. Boiling leaches nitrate into the water, so roast instead. And if your urine turns pink after beets, that's just harmless plant pigment, not a warning sign. 1 genuine caution. Beets are high in oxalates, so people with a history of calcium oxalate kidney stones are sometimes advised to moderate them. That's a conversation for you and your doctor. Next, the vegetable that delivers 1/4 of your daily potassium in a single cooked cup. Vegetable number 2 is spinach, and its superpower is the mineral story we just laid out. A cooked cup of spinach delivers around 800 milligrams of potassium, close to 1/4 of the daily target of 3,500. It also brings magnesium, which matters for vessel relaxation, and it's one of the best vegetable sources of dietary nitrate, the same nitric oxide pathway as the beetroot, from a different corner of the plate. There's an observational line of evidence here worth knowing. A large analysis from the Danish Diet, Cancer and Health Study, published in 2021 by researcher Bondo and colleagues, found that people with the highest intakes of nitrate-rich vegetables had systolic blood pressure about 2.5 millimeters of mercury lower, along with lower rates of cardiovascular disease. The benefit plateaued at a moderate intake of around 60 milligrams of nitrate per day, roughly what a single generous serving of leafy greens provides. You need consistency, not megadoses. The practical challenge with spinach is that a raw handful wilts down to almost nothing. The fix is simple: cook it. A full cooked cup is completely manageable, folded into eggs, stirred into soups, blended into sauces. And frozen spinach is entirely respectable, picked at peak and flash frozen. One note: since we're talking about life over 60, spinach, like beets, carries oxalates, so the same kidney stone conversation applies. For the vast majority of people, the potassium, nitrate, and magnesium in spinach are a clear net win. The mineral pattern is the point. Vegetable number 3 is the sweet potato, and I want to be upfront about where it fits. For decades, it was treated as a side dish, almost a dessert, candied at Thanksgiving and otherwise ignored. But by the numbers, a medium-baked sweet potato with the skin on carries more than 500 milligrams of potassium, along with magnesium and meaningful fiber, and essentially no sodium. That's the renal support pathway we've been describing, helping the kidneys handle sodium and encouraging vessel relaxation.
When we talk
Sweet
about
potato's
building a
second
strong
mechanism is less
foundation for your
direct,
health,
but it's
we
a
mean
fascinating
nourishing your
one.
body
It's a
with
source of
nutrient-rich
resistant starch,
vegetables like
carbohydrate
these.
that survives digestion and reaches the large intestine intact, where it becomes food for your gut bacteria. And your gut microbiome, it turns out, has a genuine stake in blood pressure regulation. When bacteria ferment fiber in resistant starch, they produce short-chain fatty acids, and those molecules influence the signals that control vessel tone. The details are still being mapped, but the direction of the evidence is consistent. A well-fed microbiome is associated with healthier blood pressure. Now, fairness requires me to mention a study that some headlines used to knock the humble potato. In 2024, a randomized crossover trial called Vessel, published in BMC Medicine, gave middle-aged and older adults with mildly elevated blood pressure either 4 servings a day of cruciferous vegetables or 4 servings a day of root and squash vegetables, including potato and sweet potato, for 2 weeks each. The cruciferous phase produced the bigger drop in systolic pressure, a real finding from a fair comparison. Same servings, same preparation, only the vegetable family changed. But it's a relative ranking, not a verdict on sweet potatoes, which remain a potassium-dense, fiber-rich, sodium-free choice that fits comfortably inside a dash-style pattern. If you're making a swap, the enemy isn't the sweet potato. The enemy is the processed side dish it replaces. Vegetable number 4 is the tomato, and it's here for a completely different class of compound. Tomatoes are the richest common source of lycopene, the red carotenoid pigment that gives them their color. Lycopene is a fat-soluble antioxidant, and its relationship with blood pressure has been tested in clinical studies. Meta-analyses of lycopene trials have found reductions in systolic blood pressure of roughly 3 to 4.5 millimeters of mercury, and a pooled analysis of trials using standardized tomato extract reported a reduction close to 6 millimeters of mercury. Because lycopene is fat-soluble, you absorb far more of it when tomatoes come with a little fat, olive oil over a tomato salad, or a slow-simmered sauce that has had time to release the pigment. And the tomato is a double agent. It also carries potassium. A medium one contributes roughly 290 milligrams, plus a little fiber, all in a package that's naturally almost sodium-free. Tomatoes have a practical advantage too. They're soft, easy to chew, easy to weave into every meal, and because they're one of the few vegetables that become more bioavailable when cooked, the humble canned tomato is a legitimate workhorse. Vegetable number 5 is broccoli, and it belongs on this list for a reason most people have never heard. Broccoli is a cruciferous vegetable, and cruciferous vegetables contain a compound called glucosinolates, which your body converts into a molecule called sulforaphane. Sulforaphane is famous in the research world for activating a cellular stress response pathway known as NRF2, which turns on protective antioxidant and anti-inflammatory defenses inside the blood vessel wall. And a very specific piece of evidence stands out. A randomized crossover trial called Vessel, published in BMC Medicine in 2024, took adults with mildly elevated blood pressure and had them eat 4 servings a day of cruciferous vegetables, a soup built mostly from broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, and kale. For 2 weeks, blood pressure dropped. Then the same people ate 4 servings of root and squash vegetables for 2 weeks, same amount, same preparation. Blood pressure did not drop the same way. The only thing that changed was the vegetable family. That's a remarkably clean experiment. Same people, same calories, same servings, suggesting cruciferous vegetables carry something specific, not just generic goodness. Broccoli is also quietly excellent on the minerals we already covered. It brings potassium, magnesium, and a useful amount of fiber, plus vitamin C, and like everything on this list, it's naturally sodium-free. The one preparation note that matters: broccoli's glucosinolate compounds are activated by an enzyme released when the plant cells are damaged, so chopping and letting it sit for a few minutes before cooking, or lightly steaming rather than boiling into oblivion, preserves far more of what makes it special. Now I want to give you vegetable number 6, and before I name it, let me play a small game with you. Which vegetable, when researchers pooled the clinical trials testing its effects on blood pressure, was associated with an average reduction of roughly 5 points of systolic pressure in people with hypertension? The answer is garlic, and it's not the first herb you'd expect to carry that kind of weight. The active chemistry comes from a sulfur compound called allicin, which forms when garlic is crushed or chopped. Researchers have shown that red blood cells can convert garlic compounds into hydrogen sulfide gas, and hydrogen sulfide, surprising as it sounds, relaxes vascular smooth muscle and widens blood vessels. It's a genuine molecular mechanism, not folklore. A 2016 meta-analysis by researcher Reed and colleagues pooling 20 trials found that garlic supplements lowered systolic blood pressure by an average of about 5 millimeters of mercury compared to placebo, with the effect concentrated in people who had elevated blood pressure to begin with. And garlic has one enormous practical advantage for this audience. You don't need a garlic salad. You need a few cloves folded into your cooking daily, crushed, allowed to sit, and added to vegetables, sauces, and soups. It's the easiest entry point on this entire list. Vegetable number 7 is the onion, and it shares garlic's family tree, but brings its own distinct chemistry. Onions are one of the richest dietary sources of quercetin, a flavonoid pigment especially concentrated in the outer layers, which is why red and yellow onions carry more than white ones. A medium onion delivers on the order of 50 milligrams of quercetin, and a meta-analysis of randomized trials published in the Journal of the American Heart Association found that quercetin supplementation reduced systolic blood pressure by about 3 points, with a similar reduction in diastolic. But there's a second mechanism I find genuinely fascinating because it connects this list back to a topic that's very close to my heart, your gut. Onions are packed with prebiotic fiber, specifically inulin and fructooligosaccharides, the same class of fiber that feeds your gut bacteria. And when gut bacteria ferment fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids, molecules that influence blood vessel tone and inflammation. So an onion is a kind of double agent. Quercetin working directly on your vessel walls, prebiotic fiber working through the trillions of bacteria in your colon. If you're already thinking about your microbiome from my previous video, you can see why onions show up so often in long-lived populations. A practical tip, leave the outermost fleshier layer intact when you cook with onions, since that's where the quercetin concentrates. And that brings me to vegetable number 8, the one with the longest documented history of this entire list. Celery has one of the oldest reputations in herbal medicine for calming blood pressure, and for most of history that reputation was purely empirical. Then researchers identified the likely compounds, a family of molecules called phthalides, found almost nowhere else in the diet, which laboratory studies show relax the smooth muscle lining blood vessel walls, the same muscle we've been talking about all along. A narrative review published in 2024 examined celery's antihypertensive properties and highlighted N-butyl phthalate as a bioactive compound with blood pressure-relevant activity. Celery also contributes potassium and is mostly water, making it a uniquely low-calorie, salty crunch alternative when you want something to chew on. But here's the honest part about celery, and I think you'll appreciate the honesty. The human clinical evidence for celery alone is far thinner than for beetroot, garlic, or spinach. Most of the mechanistic work is in animal models, and no one has run a large human trial on celery sticks. So I'm presenting it with a clear label. Celery is a sensible, low-sodium, potassium-containing vegetable with plausible biology behind it, not a clinical superstar. It earns a place in the pattern, not a pedestal. And that's actually a useful template for thinking about the whole list. Not every vegetable here is equally proven. And the ones with the strongest evidence, beets, leafy greens, garlic, tomatoes, are the ones you'd want to anchor your week around. Which raises the question I suspect you've been waiting for. So what do I actually do with all of this? The science supports a pattern, not a shopping list. First, the mineral infrastructure. Most people over 60 are short on potassium, and the deficit doesn't show symptoms.
Now we're tracking a bit
it just
high
quietly
in the red
makes
zone.
blood pressure harder to manage. Vegetables are how you fix it, and the ones we've discussed, sweet potato, spinach, tomato, are the heavy hitters. The World Health Organization's guidance for adults is at least 3,500 milligrams of potassium per day, and reaching that from food, not supplements, is the safe way, because food-based potassium comes with the fiber and the water, and the plant matrix that make it manageable. And this is the moment for an important safety note, because potassium is one of those nutrients where context genuinely matters. If you have chronic kidney disease, or if you take certain blood pressure medications, particularly ACE inhibitors or ARBs, which are among the most commonly prescribed drugs in the world, potassium handling in your body changes, and what's helpful for one person can be problematic for another. Vegetables rich in potassium and nitrate are not dangerous for most people, but the responsible approach is to talk to your doctor before dramatically increasing your intake and never ever stop or adjust your medication based on a YouTube video. This is general educational information, and your specific situation deserves a specific conversation with a healthcare professional. Second, the nitrate pathway. This is the mechanism that gets the least mainstream attention, and it's also the one with the clearest clinical story. Nitrate-rich vegetables, beets, spinach, and leafy greens in general feed the nitric oxide system that keeps vessels relaxed. And the evidence from the Danish cohort study is genuinely encouraging, with people consuming the most nitrate-rich vegetables showing meaningfully lower systolic pressure and lower rates of cardiovascular disease. One generous serving of leafy greens a day is the dose that seems to matter. Not a juice cleanse, not a supplement shelf, just a plate of vegetables doing what vegetables have always done. Third, the diversity principle. The Vessel study showed that the specific family of vegetable matters, and the DASH trial showed that the overall pattern matters more than any single food. Nobody in these studies ate one miracle vegetable. They ate patterns built around vegetables, and the blood pressure came down as a result. The 8 vegetables here are not 8 alternatives to choose between. They're 8 different angles of attack on the same problem: nitrates, potassium, magnesium, glucosinolates, flavonoids, prebiotic fiber, each one reaching a different mechanism. Put them together over a week, and you're not eating a diet, you're running a coordinated campaign. Fourth, and I want to say this with real care, vegetables are not a substitute for medical care, and they're not a competition with your medication. They're support. The evidence says food patterns can lower blood pressure meaningfully, and in some cases people need less medication, but that's a decision for you and your doctor, never a do-it-yourself project. There are people watching this who will have their blood pressure beautifully managed by vegetables and lifestyle, and there are people watching who will always need medication, and both outcomes are normal, and neither is a failure. The goal of this video is simple: to put the biology in your hands so you can have a smarter conversation with your healthcare team and make informed choices in your own kitchen. And that's really the quiet theme of everything we've covered today. Blood pressure above 60 is not a mysterious curse. It's a mechanical story. Stiffer arteries, accumulated salt sensitivity, a potassium deficit built into modern food, a nitric oxide system that's underfed because the vegetables that feed it became optional. Every one of those causes has a dietary countermeasure that has been validated in clinical research, and they all happen to be concentrated in the same 8 vegetables. So let me give you a feel for what a realistic week looks like, because I know lists are useless without a picture of how they become meals. Monday, overnight oats with frozen berries, and a side of sautéed spinach folded into your eggs. Tuesday, a baked sweet potato with black beans and a handful of arugula, garlic, and onions crushed into a quick vinaigrette. Wednesday, tomato soup made from canned tomatoes with olive oil, and a chopped cruciferous salad with a squeeze of lemon. Thursday, roasted beetroot and feta over greens, a quarter cup of shredded cabbage tucked into whatever protein you're eating. Friday, stir-fried broccoli and onion with garlic, over brown rice with a fried egg on top. And every day, the same quiet baseline: 1 serving of leafy greens, 1 source of nitrate, 1 source of prebiotic fiber, as many colors as your plate will hold. You'll notice there's nothing exotic in that week. No expensive powders, no imported berries, no 30-minute recipes. The vegetables that the research keeps pointing to are the ones your grandmother cooked, the ones that grow in ordinary soil and cost ordinary money. Beetroot, spinach, sweet potato, tomato, broccoli, garlic, onion, celery. There is nothing glamorous about this list, and I think that's exactly why it's trustworthy. The evidence didn't come from supplement marketing. It came from randomized trials, cohort studies, and meta-analyses assembled by researchers whose names you've now heard, studying mechanisms you now understand. Let me close by tying this back to where we started, because I think it's worth saying directly. That slow upward drift in your blood pressure numbers is not random. It's your arteries telling you in the only language they have that the elastic has worn thin, that the kidneys are holding a little more salt, and that the vessel walls would really like a few more of the molecules that help them relax. And the remarkable thing is how responsive that system is. Nitrate shows measurable effects on blood pressure in hours, not months. Potassium rebalances the sodium equation within days. The cruciferous effect in the Vessel study appeared within a 2-week window. Same people, same calories, just the right vegetables. When you give the system what it's missing, it responds. That's not a promise of miracle cures. That's just physiology doing what physiology does. If you take one thing from this video, let it be this. The 8 vegetables we covered today each carry a specific research-backed tool for supporting healthy blood pressure over 60, and together they form a pattern that has been validated at the highest level of evidence. Beetroot for nitric oxide, spinach for potassium, magnesium, and more nitrate, sweet potato for potassium and resistant starch, tomato for lycopene and potassium, broccoli for glucosinolates and the cruciferous effect, garlic for its sulfur chemistry, onion for quercetin and prebiotic fiber, and celery, the honest underdog with plausible biology and a long history. None of them is a magic bullet. All of them together, in a regular weekly rotation, are a genuinely evidence-based way to support the numbers your doctor writes down at every visit. And I'll leave you with one more honest sentence. I can't tell you what your blood pressure will do, because everyone's body is different, and anyone who promises you a specific number is selling something. What I can tell you is the biology, and the biology is clear. The same vessels that stiffen with age are the ones that relax when you give them potassium, magnesium, nitrate, and the plant compounds that research keeps circling back to. The vegetables are the delivery system for all of it. Your part is just to put them on the plate, week after week, and let the system do the rest. So if this video helped you see your vegetable choices a little differently, make sure to subscribe to the channel. And if you want, leave a comment telling me which of these 8 surprised you most, or how you cook your beets, because I genuinely want to know. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.